Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 35th place pick out of my top 50 favourite cars in the world, or favourite vehicles more specifically, and this one is a car which I don't talk about quite as much as something like the Tesla Model S or the Ferrari FF or a couple of others when it comes to being a true practical performance car. But at the same time, it is definitely one of my favourites. We're getting up into the much higher territory now, into around the top 30 region, and this car for me definitely deserves to be here. This is my favourite Aston Martin ever. It's the only Aston Martin to feature in my entire top 50 list, and Aston Martin is one of those brands which I basically had a complete 180 on since childhood, because when I was a kid, I didn't really care about Aston Martin. To me, they were Bond cars, and that was it. I had not very much interest in James Bond, not very much interest in most Aston Martins, and some of them I'm still not a huge fan of. The Vanquish, I'm not a huge fan of. The DB9, I'm not a huge fan of. But there are certain cars which they've made which I truly love. And one of them, funnily enough, is actually the Signet, which I know a lot of people view as an absolute joke. Some people even view it as a insulting gimmick, which I can understand. Of course, they made the car because they had to, due to rules and regulations, but still, to me it's just awesome to have this tiny little frugal Aston Martin city car, and I tell you what, it wasn't a bad idea for people who own it, because look at the value of those things compared to the value of a Toyota IQ, simply because of the difference in badge. A Toyota IQ you can buy now for like $3,000, the Aston Martin will still set you back about 20 for a used one. It's the same car underneath. But to me, it's just an awesome little car. I would buy an Aston Martin Signet in a heartbeat. I probably wouldn't fit in it, but I'd buy it anyway. However, that one is not on the list, and this one is. Because this really is the Aston Martin for me that just ticks all the boxes. And that car is, in a roundabout kind of way, especially from a design point of view, essentially a four-door version of an Aston Martin which I already said I don't like, the DB9, or the Virage even. And that car is, of course, the Rapide, the four-door luxury limo from Aston Martin. Now, there is actually a precedent for me to like four-door Aston Martins, because I actually really like the old-school Lagonda as well, which, if you haven't seen that car, basically looks like an Aston Martin Volvo. So, not to everyone's taste, of course, but I like weird cars, wacky cars, and as I've said before a number of times, and as I'll say again in this series, I absolutely adore when a car combines exotic performance with true practical usability on a daily basis. Those are some of my absolute favourite cars, and most of my dream cars tend to fall into that category. And for me, this is one of those cars which, as far as my favourites and dream cars go, the only reason why this one is not even higher on the list is because there are other cars which I like even more for this kind of thing. If, for instance, there was no Ferrari FF, then this would be higher. And it's already higher on the list for me than the Tesla. And that may seem strange, given that people have talked, or people have heard me talk specifically about the Tesla quite a lot, how good that car is as an all-rounder, irrespective even of whether or not it's electric. It really has nothing to do with that almost. It's just a really good all-round package. However, this one's even higher, even though it's a slower car, it's a more expensive car, it's a less efficient car for running costs. So why is it higher? Well, the reason why is the same reason why the Ferrari FF is. And that is because the Tesla is academically brilliant, but there's just a little bit of soul that's not there for me. The lack of a normal sound, although that doesn't bother me always. If you're going to get an exotic, if at all possible, I like the car to have a nice sound. I also like silent cars, so that doesn't bother me. But in the case of the Tesla, it's more than just the lack of sound. It's, as I said in that video, a very German-esque vehicle. It has a very efficient, luxury, rolling office kind of vibe to it. Whereas I prefer cars that are more like Spiker or Pagani, where they go super out of the box, almost like gothic in their design, with little intricate details like fine watches or aviation. I love that kind of stuff, that attention to detail. This car isn't fully on that camp, but it's certainly more inclined towards that than a Tesla is, because Aston Martin, they really know what they're doing when it comes to the design of their cars, and for me, inside and out. And that's something which I've touched on before. for me, a huge part of how much I love a car has to do with the interior, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good looking the car is from the outside, you can't see the outside most of the time. So if you buy a car purely because of how it looks from the outside, you're clearly not buying it for yourself, you're buying it for other people to see. Whereas for me, and I'm sure for many of you guys as well, the interior is where you spend all of your time. So you need to have an interior which you enjoy being in. And for some people, that could be just bare bones carbon fibre with a roll cage. And that's fair enough, I can totally get that. And even some of my cars are like that in this list. But for me, something like an Aston, it's just a nice place to be. It's a nice interior to sit in, whether you're stuck in traffic, flying down the Autobahn, or even parked in a driveway. It's just a nice interior, it's a nice style overall. The car, I think, is extremely elegant in the way it looks. It manages to be almost disproportionately long, but at the same time it looks right. It doesn't look ridiculous. And of course you've got that gorgeous 5.9 litre, what is it, around 470 horsepower V12. Sounds fantastic, and although it's not as quick as a Tesla, it's no slouch. I mean, it's an Aston with a V12, so of course it's no slouch. And the used values are actually quite good. You can pick one of these up for less than a Tesla in their used form, which is pretty impressive. So overall, I love the Rapide. It's by far my favourite Aston Martin, with the Signet and the Lagonda coming in just behind it for me. But yeah, I love the car. It is one of my dream vehicles, but unfortunately, because of stuff like the FF, well, not really unfortunately, but unfortunately for this car, it takes more of a back seat for me. It's one which I would definitely consider buying if I had that kind of cash, but I don't know if I actually would. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, if you want to check out other cars in my top 50 favourites, you can click through at the end to see those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.